I love controversy. I don't mean in the way people usually associate with it. I mean in general, I find it to be enjoyable to dive into them. Sure, sometimes I'll get battered and bruised, but in the end I come up on top with new insights. Once again, I'm poking the bear with a stick, but I don't care. As the term Nazi is flaunted shamelessly in modern society, degrading the actual meaning behind it. How so? Allow me to start off with this take. If everyone is a Nazi, then nobody is a Nazi. Having a different opinion gets you cancelled. Having a different opinion gets you called a Nazi. Gets you called a white supremacist. It gets you called an oppressor when really you're just some average Joe being talked down to by a privileged elitist brat. Privileged as in they survive with government taxpayer services and get to spout anti-free speech rhetoric online and in person with threats of death and violence. Fighting fire with fire seems all too ironic if their actions were respective to their beliefs, which to me only seems to be nothing short of genuine terrorism. But I want to entertain the loonies here because I want to help everyone, including them, in spotting an actual Nazi. In short, the obvious signs are attire, but the purpose of my videos isn't surface level. As such, I will firstly add in historical relevance as well as add in 19th, 20th century politics, modern language, as well as hopefully help reform how we actually understand things. Nazism started off as a political party, but historically it was designed to be intertwined with what we in the modern world call neo-fascism. Nazism, which is nationalist socialism, wasn't just a political party. It was a system of governance built on racial supremacy, authoritarianism, and expansionist militarism. The actions of the Nazi regime and its ideology were fundamentally intertwined. The ideology itself, its core tenets, explicitly advocated for the exclusion, subjugation, and extermination of certain groups. From this point forward, I'm going to refrain from the term racism because it's technically inaccurate, since it broadly means hatred against humanity. As such, I'll use instead as ancestral discrimination. Yes, it takes longer to say, but since my channel is in business about remaining truthful, this is what I'll use. So back to Nazism. While the left-right spectrum originated in the French Revolution, it didn't fully dominate political discourse until the 20th century. Earlier politics focused more on monarchy versus parliament, or church versus secularism, than abstract ideology. At the time, there was no left or right. Just different groups of people with different ideas. Sure, this sounds identical. But the key takeaway here is in the 20th century everything has to be some degree of left or right, whereas, back then, political parties were standalone. If there was a spectrum we have in the modern world for back then, it wouldn't exist because it didn't exist at the time. In essence, people thought politics differently. Take for example the concept nationalist socialism. If we were to put it into modern understanding, they technically would be conflicting because nationalism is right, while socialism is left. As such, Nazism and Adolf Hitler wasn't left or right. It was just nationalist socialism. More accurately, nationalism is closer related to traditionalism because it's in the same space in the spectrum. However, if we look at the spectrum as 19th century, or just a circle, then you could actually have a nationalist communist, which is bewildering. Even a nationalist dictatorship. But by that point, we just refer to it as dictatorship. Because it wouldn't be a dictatorship if it wasn't nationalist. Which ties into another point. Nationalism is a path to tyranny. So, the solution then is to turn around and go the other way. But that too is a path towards tyranny. So what's the solution? Centrism. Centrism sounds ideal. Balance and reason. But even the center can calcify into authoritarianism when it tries to suppress extremes through force. The real danger isn't left, right, or center. It's unchecked power in any form. So what's the real solution? Figuring out your damn identity. Which, believe it or not, is some form of globalization or nationalism. Once that's sorted, you figure out the kind of civilization you want, and universally stick to it because any degree of overt authority for one reason or another leads towards tyranny. So the solution is actually anarchism, a lack of government. As such, tyranny can't exist then, right? Wrong. Even in the absence of government, human nature fills the vacuum. The ambitious will rise, organize, and rule. Tyranny doesn't require a system. It only requires people. So how do you spot a Nazi? In the 1940s it was easy. Today? In theory they're extinct. In practice they're not. They're just better at hiding. And ironically, the people crying Nazi at everyone have made that job even easier. The boy who cried wolf was right. The problem is, when you're the boy who cried Nazi, you're wrong, because all those who you accuse likely aren't actual Nazis. The real number? Probably closer to 0.001% of the population. And those people know better than to show their faces. Here is a take. Did Nazism create the atrocities? That depends on how you look at it. Yes, they did create it. However, such atrocities also have existed well before Nazi Germany. If we look at Nazism as a tool, we can see how it was intended. Were cars designed for us to run over our neighbor or to get from point A to B? Were firearms created to eradicate or to protect and defend? Context matters because the tool inherently isn't evil, in a sense. However, it can be used for evil. And Nazism was a tool designed to do just that. Correlation is not causation. We can correlate Nazism with authoritarianism, but causation becomes blurry. Authoritarianism is far older than Nazism. But Nazism didn't just reflect it. It perfected it in the most brutal, mechanized way imaginable. So, how do you spot a Nazi? Before I tell, you must understand the things to look out for. What are these? We know Karl Marx invented Marxism, as such socialism and communism. But Marx didn't create Nazism, neither was he responsible for the atrocities that followed. Anyone blaming Marx directly for the atrocities of others is either misinformed or ignoring the distinction between idea and implementation. How so? Because the very idea suggests thought. A thing we as humans naturally have is somehow a bad thing. The idea that ideas are bad are just as telling on someone's psychological maturity. Moreover, isn't thinking or having ideas something these very same tyrannical regimes attack? Isn't it ironic that the people calling ideas like Marxism dangerous are often the first to demand censorship, obedience, and silence, the very tactics of the regimes they claim to oppose? We know what Mao and Stalin did during their reigns, but the ideas before their inception aren't at fault. Authoritarianism, socialism, Marxism, communism, capitalism, all tools. All not inherently evil. However, Nazism as a tool fundamentally was created to be just that. The real evil is how those tools are used. I've asked it enough already, and so I'll explain now. How do you spot a Nazi? Why, it's easy. You look for the iconic logos and badges. Even quotes, memos, phrases, statements. I guarantee you'll find people who share Nazi ideas but aren't actual Nazis. The key difference is identitarianism. Do these people salute like a Nazi? Not only do they share Nazi beliefs, but do they also practice them? Are you sure they're not a history nut? Just because you stumble into a room decorated from floor to ceiling with Nazism doesn't automatically make a person a Nazi. Even say a tattoo of a swastika doesn't make someone a Nazi. Why? Because the swastika has been around longer than Nazism, and it's an actual landmark in Germany. Believe it or not, the swastika has historical positive meaning. Sadly, Adolf Hitler butchered, vandalized, and alienated it to be a symbol of hate. So no, a tattoo of a swastika is not a sign of a Nazi. The real take in how to spot a Nazi? Forget looking for a Nazi and start looking for people with what I've said earlier in the video. Racial supremacy, authoritarianism, and expansionist militarism. The actions of the Nazi regime and its ideology were fundamentally intertwined. The ideology itself, its core tenets, explicitly advocated for the exclusion, subjugation, and extermination of certain groups. Who does this remind you of? That's right. Today, some justify exclusion or discrimination in the name of justice, but they use the same tools of suppression, hate, and identity-based judgment that we once fought to eliminate. The packaging changed. The ideology didn't. Moreover, you say the wrong word or have a wrong opinion, you get targeted for hate despite the accusers projecting. We have a faction of people in humanity that want to exclude, subjugate, and exterminate certain groups of people because of skin color. Allow me to leave this video with this final question. Who is the real Nazi? Hey you! Hit subscribe! And don't forget to turn on the bell notification for your daily upload alerts. Give it a share. Leave a like and make a comment.